Well, across regions and power centers today, one question echoes. What happens when a people finally see the truth for themselves and refuse to be silenced? In French Cameroon, the groundswell of resistance grows louder as Issa Tchiroma stands firm and citizens push back against a system they believe has long failed them. Yet the regime's response remains predictable, with Minister Atanga Nji repeating the familiar script of loyalty to Yaoundé's old order. But for how long can a government insist on authority when the streets are declaring a different reality? And beyond Central Africa, another question emerges on the world stage. When global partners meet under the glare of controversy, who controls the narrative? The press or the power players? As former United States President Donald Trump welcomed the Saudi Crown Prince to Washington, tensions flared when an ABC reporter pressed on uncomfortable topics, prompting Trump to revisit claims of media bias and defend his guest before the cameras. Today's news spans the quiet calculations of diplomacy and the loud demands of a people rising. From the corridors of the White House to the restless streets of French Cameroon, we follow the shifting lines of power, perception, and accountability. Welcome to the Flash News. I am Star Smart. Let's begin. The political atmosphere in French Cameroon continues to thicken with tension as Issa Tchiroma doubles down on his 48-hour ultimatum to Paul Biya, a deadline he says has not been met as required. Speaking passionately in a circulating video, Tchiroma reiterates that the French Cameroon regime's failure to address citizens' demands has pushed the nation into a somber chapter. He announced a national day of mourning in honor of victims of the post-election violence, declaring Friday a public holiday with a minute of silence to be observed at midday for those who were killed and tortured. Those he addressed as martyrs. Let's take a listen.
On October 12, 2025, you spoke. You made your choice. And for daring to defend that choice, some Cameroonians have fallen under the bullet of a desperate regime. They fell in the streets of our city, hunted down, beaten, and tortured. They fell so that the truth may live. In their memory, in homage to their sacrifice, and in fidelity to our common oath, in my capacity as a president-elect, I decided that Friday, November 21, 2025, as a national day of mourning. This day will be a public holiday throughout the national territory. It will be a day of silence, remembrance, and reflection. I invite you to observe a minute of silence exactly at noon 12 p.m. throughout the national territory and in the diaspora.
Well, instead of addressing the mounting grievances, we see that the Minister of Territorial Administration, Paul Atanga Nji, who since the election seemed to be the regime's spokesperson, he has escalated his familiar rhetoric of intimidation. In another video, Atanga Nji threatens that Issa Tchiroma will not escape punishment once all this is over, insisting that Paul Biya remains the legitimate president and accusing Tchiroma of inciting violence. But his statement reveals two major blind spots. First, he speaks of an afterward as though the crisis will resolve on the old government's terms. For Tchiroma and for the citizens rising across French Cameroon, the struggle does not end when the government says so. It ends when they reclaim the mandate they believe was stolen and then ascribe President-elect Issa Tchiroma will be the one leading the French Cameroon. Well, let's take a listen to Atanga Nji making these intimidating remarks.
So we can never accept this kind of wanton destruction, irresponsible behavior coming from a candidate who pretends to have won the election. He cannot win. And he will pay for the crimes no matter where he is hiding. It is clear that he will pay for the crimes. We are from the Northwest and we have tasted the bitterness of violence. We have tasted the bitterness of disorder. So we want to tell Cameroonians on no account we should accept disorder. It is an election, a presidential election. The Constitutional Council that validated all the candidacies has put an end to the process that President Paul Biya won the elections. And President Paul Biya has taken the oath of office. And during the oath of office, he invited all Cameroonians to join him to build a big nation.
Oh, well, another thing observed in his passionate remark is how the Minister of Territorial Administration, Atanga Nji, he appears oblivious to the obvious shift in national sentiment. The fact that beyond CPDM loyalists, virtually no one in Cameroon recognizes Paul Biya as president anymore. This growing rejection manifested publicly amongst many scenarios during a service where the nuncio to Cameroon was giving a speech in Bamenda, where murmurs rippled across the congregation the moment the nuncio to Cameroon referred to Paul Biya as president. Let's take a look.
Representative of the President of the Republic of Cameroon, His Excellency Paul Biya.
Oh, well, the reaction there was instantaneous, unplanned, and unanimous. It was a collective gesture that spoke louder than any official press release. It revealed a population that is no longer willing to pretend. The disenchantment is not confined to urban centers or elite circles. Even religious leaders are questioning the integrity of French Cameroon's electoral process. A pastor from Batibo in the southern Cameroons is in yet another circulating clip, wondered how Paul Biya supposedly garnered over 5,000 votes in a southern Cameroon's locality that strictly adhered to the no French Cameroon elections lockdown imposed by the Amazonian government. He questioned that in his message. We'll take a listen.
I am from Batibo. I cannot imagine that during elections, the people of Batibo don't have to vote because of lockdown. And at the end, they say 5,000 people voted in Batibo. It is not wickedness. It is not corruption in the highest order. And we do it that shame. And we move on and we say we are one.
5,000 votes from a county that obviously adhered to the Ambazonian no French Cameroon elections lockdown. The irony, well, his concluding words, were pointed, invoking divine justice against those who falsify results and those who abuse power. Taken together, these moments, the ultimatum, the threat, the public murmuring, and the spiritual indictment, it signal that Cameroon is crossing a psychological threshold. The government authority is no longer merely questioning French Cameroon. It is rejected in real time, in public spaces, on camera, and across the nation's emotional landscape. It is clear that French Cameroon is experiencing a legitimacy crisis of historic proportions. Issa Tchiroma's National Day of Mourning is not just symbolic. It marks a widening gulf between the rulers and the ruled. And every attempt at intimidation only reinforces the central truth of this moment, that the people no longer fear speaking, protesting, or even rejecting the old narratives of power. The era in which titles and declaration alone could silence the population is fading fast. As the nation stands at this crossroads, one reality is unmistakable: the people's refusal to recognize Paul Biya's mandate being no longer a whisper. It is an open chorus, and no amount of threats, denials, or official proclamations can reverse a population that has already turned its back. Now, away from Central Africa, we see that in Washington, once again, it has become the center of diplomatic attention as the United States President Donald Trump met with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, continuing a long-standing alliance defined by energy security, counter-terrorism cooperation, and regional strategy. The meeting, widely covered across international media and online platforms, reflected ongoing efforts by both sides to reinforce economic partnerships and address shifting geopolitical dynamics in the Middle East. According to reports and video footage from the event, discussions touched on defense cooperation, investment frameworks, and regional stability. The tone of the meeting appeared warm and strategic, with both leaders stressing their shared goals. Observers noted that Trump highlighted Saudi Arabia's economic reforms and the country's growing role in global energy markets, while the Crown Prince reiterated commitments to modernization and continued cooperation with Washington. Now, during the press availability, tensions sharpened when a reporter from ABC News raised a question concerning the ongoing controversy surrounding the Crown Prince. Trump immediately interjected, sensing a perceived bias, first asking the reporter what outlet she represented, and calling the ABC fake news, revisiting his long-standing public criticism of the network dating back to even before he took office. Now, noting he views ABC as historically biased in its political coverage, President Trump then shifted to defend his guest, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, urging the reporter not to embarrass someone who has come to visit the White House. With such a question, he insisted that the Crown Prince had nothing to do with what she asked him of, steering the conversation away from the controversy and back towards the diplomatic purpose of the visit. Well, let's take a listen.
Is it appropriate, Mr. President, for your family to be doing business in Saudi Arabia while you're president? Is that a conflict of interest? And Your Royal Highness, the U.S. intelligence concluded that you orchestrated the brutal murder of a journalist. 9/11 families are furious that you are here in the Oval Office. Why should Americans trust you? And the same to you, Mr. President.
Now, who are you with?
I'm with ABC News, sir.
You're with who?
ABC News, sir.
Fake news. ABC fake news. One of the worst in the business. But I'll answer your question. I have nothing to do with the family business. I have left, and when I've devoted 100% of my energy. What my family does is fine. They do business all over. They've done very little with Saudi Arabia, actually. I'm sure they could do a lot. And anything they've done has been very good. That's what we've done. We've built a tremendous business for a long time. I've been very successful. I decided to leave that success behind and make America very successful. And I've made America more successful by far than it ever was, and that it ever could have been, no matter who was president. There would be nobody bringing in $21 trillion, that I can tell you right now. As far as this gentleman is concerned, he's done a phenomenal job. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing about it. And we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like that.
Well, his response underscored his position that international partners should be treated with respect during official engagements, particularly in movements meant to reinforce cooperation rather than rekindle disputes. But then the Crown Prince addressed the same issue right after. He delivered a measured response that acknowledged brother concerns but emphasized Saudi Arabia's commitment to reform and regional stability.
I feel painful about, the families of 9/11 in America, but, we have to focus on reality. Reality based on CIA documents and based on a lot of documents that Osama bin Laden used Saudi people in that event for one main purpose, is to destroy this relation, to destroy the American-Saudi relation. That's the purpose of 9/11. So whoever buying that means they are helping Osama bin Laden's purpose of destroying this relation. He knows that strong relation between America and Saudi Arabia, it's bad for extremism, it's bad for terrorism. And we have to approve him wrong and to build our relation, to continue developing our relation. It's critical in the safety of the world. It's critical against extremism and terrorism. About the journalists, it's really painful to hear, anyone that been losing his life for no real purpose or nothing illegal way, and it's been painful for us in Saudi Arabia. We've did all the right steps of investigation, etc., in Saudi Arabia, and we've improved our system to be sure that nothing happened like that. And it's painful and it's a huge mistake, and we are doing our best that this doesn't happen again.
Well, the Crown Prince remarks aim to reassure allies watching the exchange and to reinforce the kingdom's intention to continue its modernization agenda. The significance of this meeting lies not only in the United States-Saudi strategic ties, but also in the evolving media environment surrounding global diplomacy. The interaction with the ABC reporter highlighted ongoing tensions between political leaders and major news networks, while also underscoring how scrutiny from international journalists influences the tone of high-level diplomatic encounters. Taken together, the meeting reflects a moment where long-standing alliances, media dynamics, and domestic political narratives intersect, shaping both the public perception and the diplomatic realities of the United States-Saudi engagement. Well, still on Trump, we see that in a move that surprised much of Washington, Donald Trump signed into law the legislation requiring the release of government records relating to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The signing marked a sharp reversal from his earlier resistance to the bill, which has stalled for months despite bipartisan support. Trump announced the decision on social media, confirming that he had signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act without the usual ceremonial backdrop. The legislation's passage on November 18th added to its political weight, coming during a period of heightened public interest in government transparency and institutional accountability. The bill's enactment signals a potential transformative moment, the possibility that long-sealed records could shed light on how Epstein's network operated, who had contact with him, and how various institutions responded over the years. Lawmakers from both major parties praised the move, describing the release as critical to public trust. However, insiders warn that the full impact of this legislation will depend on the implementation process. Even with presidential approval, federal agencies retain the authority to apply redactions, invoke procedural delays, or cite ongoing investigations, any of which could significantly limit public access to sensitive sections of the file. These uncertainties have led analysts to view the coming months as a test of how far transparency will truly go and whether this move leads to answers or further debate. Well, these development carries global implications as well, with Epstein's connections extending beyond U.S. borders, touching financial, political, and social elites in multiple countries. Any disclosure could spur international conversations about accountability, institutional oversight, and the protection of vulnerable individuals. Well, away from the United States, we see that Nigeria is once more confronting a surge of deadly violence as international attention turns to the worsening humanitarian situation affecting communities in the country's middle belt and northern regions. In recent days, reports from local and international observers highlighted a new wave of coordinated attacks that left dozens dead, including women and children. The most recent incident, documented by human rights monitors and local authorities, involved armed assailants storming rural communities in Plateau State, setting homes ablaze and displacing entire families overnight. The escalation has renewed global concerns about what advocacy groups describe as systematic attacks targeting vulnerable Christian populations. International organizations have called on the Nigerian government to strengthen protections efforts and address the root causes of the violence, which include land disputes, religious tensions, and the expansion of armed non-state groups. Crisis also drew an unexpected voice from outside the political realm. World-renowned rapper Nicki Minaj. First, in a recent social media post that quickly went viral, she expressed shock over the unfolding violence and urged global audiences not to ignore what she referred to as a humanitarian tragedy. And just yesterday, Nicki Minaj spoke to the United Nations to bring awareness to the religious killings in Nigeria. Let's listen to her.
It is an honor to stand on this stage with you and the other distinguished speakers here today to shine a spotlight on the deadly threat faced by thousands of Christians in Nigeria. I would like to thank President Trump for prioritizing this issue and for his leadership on the global stage in calling for urgent action to defend Christians in Nigeria, to combat extremism, and to bring a stop to violence against those who simply want to exercise their natural right to freedom of religion or belief. I stand here as a proud New Yorker with a deep sense of gratitude that we live in a country where we can freely and safely worship God regardless of one's creed, background, or politics. No group should ever be persecuted for practicing their religion, like I recently stated on social media. And we don't have to share the same beliefs in order for us to respect each other. We're way beyond thinking or expecting or assuming for, the person sitting next to you to have the exact same beliefs. We're beyond that. That's ridiculous. But that shouldn't make one person feel less safe than anyone in any room. Music has taken me around the globe. I have seen how people, no matter their language, culture, or religion, come alive when they hear a song that touches their soul. Religious freedom means we all can sing our faith regardless of who we are, where we live, and what we believe. But today, faith is under attack in ways.
Well, her comments amplified worldwide attention, mobilizing supporters, influencers, and diaspora communities to demand stronger international action and accountability. Human rights advocates say global visibility may push government, multilateral institutions, and aid groups to intensify their response. But on the ground, the urgency remains. Families continue to flee, communities remain under threat, and many fear the crisis could deepen without decisive intervention. Well, in Kyiv, tensions rose sharply in diplomatic circles after news emerged that the United States had presented Ukraine with a draft peace framework containing major concessions to Russia. According to information shared with AFP by an individual familiar with the document, the proposal includes provisions for the recognition of Crimea and other regions that the Russians have taken, alongside a significant reduction of Ukraine's armed forces to around 400,000 personnel. The plan reportedly calls for Ukraine to relinquish all long-range weapons, a condition that analysts warn will dramatically limit Kyiv's defensive capacity and alter the balance of power in Eastern Europe. The proposal immediately triggered unease amongst European allies. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas publicly pushed back against the draft, emphasizing that for any plan to work, it needs Ukraine and Europe on board. Her remarks reflect wider concerns in Europe that any settlement perceived as mirroring Moscow's demand could undermine Ukraine's sovereignty and set a dangerous precedent for future conflict. International experts note that while Washington has sought pathways to reduce global tensions, the details of this particular proposal, if confirmed, could reshape the geopolitical architecture of the region. Ukrainian officials have not yet issued a full public response, but early reactions within Kyiv's political circles suggest apprehension and resistance to concessions framed as unilateral. The coming days will likely determine whether the draft becomes a basis for future negotiations or is set aside amid broader transatlantic disagreement. Well, Brussels is prepared to introduce a significant overhaul of its artificial intelligence and data privacy frameworks as European policymakers face a rising pressure from both domestic industries and international competitors. The long-awaited proposals set to be presented Wednesday come amid concerns that Europe's heavy regulatory approach has slowed innovation and left the continent trailing behind the United States and Chinese tech giants. The initiative aims to streamline digital regulations and reduce bureaucratic barriers for European companies, a shift the EU hopes will drive productivity and strengthen its global competitiveness. Now, according to officials, Tech Chief Henna Virkkunen will unveil the reform package alongside Justice Commissioner Michael McGrath, who oversees data protection. While some reports have suggested that the reforms were influenced by pressure from the United States administration, Brussels has firmly denied these allegations, insisting that the changes reflect internal EU priorities rather than external demands. The Commission maintains that simplifying rules does not mean compromising on European values, including consumer protections and privacy rights. However, several EU member states worry that the balance between regulation and innovation has tilted too heavily towards caution in recent years. They argue that while robust protections remain essential, excessive red tape has hindered Europe's ability to build world-class tech ecosystems. The new proposals will attempt to bridge that divide, offering streamlined regulations designed to encourage growth while reassuring governments and citizens that Europe's digital safeguards will remain intact. Now, as events unfold from French Cameroon to Washington's diplomatic stage, there is one thing that remains clear. Power is being questioned. Narratives are shifting. And the world is watching with sharper eyes than ever. We'll continue to follow these developments as leaders respond, alliances evolve, and people demand to be heard. But for now, this has been the Flash News. Thank you for joining in.